writing the code is all well and good. How should you think about things like design reviews and code reviews? We typically distinguish these in two different ways. When we talk about design reviews, we're talking about not necessarily the visual aspects of a feature, although that is certainly a process and exists elsewhere. But what we're really talking about is the architecture, the design patterns, which we'll come back to in this course, the higher level flow of how a system might be built. So when we talk about design, the goal here is to think about before we build something, everyone in the meeting can share their experience of how this might work. Do we need something like a database that does X, Y, or Z features? How might we design the schema of the system before we continue? Code review happens after the design has been implemented, where you are looking at code. There's no sense arguing about the particularities of things like function names and indentation and particular styles of code before you have code written. The goal here is that the design review should give us a flow and a process. The code review should be concrete and looking at a specific implementation of code. Regardless of whether we're going to review code or designs, it's important that we have an agenda, how we proceed with the meeting. And it's useful to have a list of questions that should be discussed that are topical to the actual feature. Those might be higher level. If it is a design review, they might be very specific about certain edge cases or security vulnerabilities if it is a code review. Always remember to, in either case, start with the customer desires and the reason that this feature exists. If it's security, that might be pretty obvious that we don't want security vulnerabilities in an app, but it's helpful to state why you're having that meeting so that everyone's on the same page. Make sure that when we are having those meetings that you're using appropriate diagrams, you're discussing the architecture, referring back to APIs. Chapter 11 will have some of this as well. If it's code level, we'll talk about the refactorings in a video for Module 9. But the idea here is go through both code and documentation for the project. You want to have a testing plan. You want to talk about the schedule if it's important. Are you all on the same page for what is being built? And you can remember from earlier topics of both verification and validation apply. Are we building the right thing? And now that we know that we built the right thing, does it do what we asked it to do? We are fans of acronyms, and because pretty much everyone are fans of food, we have a food acronym called SAMOSAs, and this is a general framework for good meetings. I will also note that these meetings do not have to be technical meetings. General rules apply to all meetings. Start and stop the meeting promptly, have an agenda for the meeting, and importantly, share the agenda in advance so that everyone who arrives at the meeting has a sense of why it is there. Record minutes so everyone can recall the results. One person at a time talking in the meeting, no interrupting others. Send other material in advance since reading it is faster. If you can prepare the material and have people review it, you'll use the valuable time of finding a room, getting everyone in the room to its maximum effect. Have action items at a meeting, which means if something needs to be done specifically after the meeting, record it separately. Ideally, you would record who's responsible and by what time it needs to be done. And the last thing for every good meeting is to set the date and time of the next meeting. If you have regular meetings, if your stand-up is always at the same time and place, all the better. You don't need to do this. But it's always helpful to check in. Tomorrow's a holiday, no meeting, we'll meet on Thursday instead. Next week we've got a conference, so here's how we're going to schedule things. Whenever you're meeting, in particular with a customer or someone you don't meet with on a regular schedule, it is always worth the few minutes to discuss this. And in particular, if you go into the meeting knowing that your last step is scheduling a meeting, that's why I'm harping on this, you should check your calendars, propose a few dates, be prepared to schedule the next meeting. Recording minutes, super important to have review of what's there. All of these practices for meetings apply for pretty much any regular job that you'll have. And getting good at meetings makes you a better collaborator and a better colleague. We talked about the challenges of sort of big pull requests. This applies to reviews of all sorts as well. A book Shalloway from a few years ago sort of addressed formal design and code reviews often occur too late in the process to make a big impact. So if formal design and reviews occur too late in the process to make a big impact, what should the solution be to increasing the impact of those code reviews? And like we said at the beginning, having an approach to reviews is super important, which means make them smaller and more frequent. The description that comes here is to do something that you can call an approach review. Some people call it sort of a mini design review or a design planning meeting, which is get a few developers together to come up with a high-level approach to solve the problem. You don't need to write all the functions down, but decide, what tools might we be using, what external services might we interact with. You might brainstorm any pitfalls that occur, and you can discuss together trade-offs. If you're doing a formal design review, give people background to sort of prep quickly. Write a sort of one-pager, hold a mini session beforehand to make that work a little bit easier, to essentially break the large task into smaller and smaller steps that can occur more frequently. On a big team, you might not hold one design review, but you might hold, 2 or 3 smaller design reviews as you flesh out the particular details. And the goal here is avoid big surprises. Everyone should come in on the same page. They should come in with a clear idea of what's being discussed. This is particularly important if you're working on designs that have cross-cutting concerns with multiple teams in a company. No one likes being surprised at a meeting that says, hey, your work for the next 4 months is going to change because we need some crazy new feature from your team. Avoid the big reviews and hold smaller, more frequent meetings that make those discussions easier to happen. So, could we just have quantitative metrics and avoid some of the processes of code reviews? Quantitative metrics are helpful, but there's no world in which quantitative metrics capture everything that exists in the process of developing an app. If we compare this across teams, there are things like code size. We could quantify the effort and time. We can quantify milestones that have been met. We can quantify defect rates like bugs filed and so on. But what we know from Agile and what we know from story points, right, is that velocity is not a metric that we can use to compare teams to each other. It turns out code metrics as well are not things that are set in stone, and we can't use them to compare across teams. They're useful within a team, but they cannot replace reviews alone. There's no such thing as a pull request which is good solely because it changes one line of code, and a pull request which is bad solely because it changes more than a few lines. The context matters around those pull requests. This is now sort of a decade old, but a good quote here, which is, however, we are still quite a long way from our ideal situation, and there are no signs that automated quality assessment will become a reality in the foreseeable future. All of these metrics get to some description of our code, but they don't actually tell us whether or not it is good code. And that's in part because good code, a good feature, is really a judgment of the team and of the authors. And so, maybe one day the AIs will replace us all, but until the AIs have judgment, we're going to have to rely on humans to be doing our reviews. How else might we think about doing reviews? Pivotal Labs, one of the companies from which we borrow a lot of the philosophy of how we do software engineering, they take the approach that pair programming is a form of continuous review. So there aren't any special code reviews. If 2 people are working on a feature together and 2 people agree that this thing should be merged and the test pass, you don't need any sort of special review for a particular feature. GitHub, as we mentioned, they use pull requests as the review model. And over time, pull requests get more and more full-featured to do things like code review. There are approve and reject changes flows. There are comments on individual lines of code. There's even a handy feature to inline suggest particular fixes to a file. But that takes the place of formal code reviews. And this works not just for internally at GitHub, but any open source project on GitHub. And as a team, right, each person gets to determine how they want to work in that particular flow. One thing that I will say is that if you start to have a concern about a pull request, you can have that discussion online and in the pull request. If you start to go back and forth after a couple rounds, that's a great time to decide to have a short team meeting if possible. And again, frequent PRs means that those reviews don't need to be so intense. They can be simple sign-offs, mean that if it's a team that's all working at the same time, you make a pull request. Ideally, someone else gives that pull request a look over in the same day. It gets merged in and deployed, as frequently as your team can deploy.